The year is 1000. Forget unified kingdoms, paved roads, and safe markets. Picture yourself on a cold, windswept European hilltop, looking down upon a fractured, terrifying landscape. This world is being violently reshaped by a single, formidable invention, the private fortress. This is the crucible moment, the birth of the medieval castle, and with it, the very DNA of feudal power. Imagine the smell of wet earth and freshly cut timber filling the cool morning air as we watch the very first castle rise from the mist. You can hear the distant sound of axes striking wood. You can feel the damp fog clinging to your cloak. If you are enjoying our journey into the past, please take a moment to like and subscribe. And I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there for you? It is always a joy to visualize our community gathered together from across the globe. Now, find a comfortable position, let your shoulders drop, and let us travel back to the dawn of the feudal age. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we begin not with stone towers, but with a world in collapse, where safety was a memory and the horizon was filled with danger. The story of the castle does not begin with strength. It begins with fear. It begins with the collapse of the great order that had held Europe together. For a time, under the rule of Charlemagne, there was a sense of unity. But empires are fragile things. In the year 843, the Treaty of Verdun was signed. It was a document meant to settle a dispute between brothers, but in practice, it took the massive Carolingian Empire and shattered it into 3 separate parts. The unified shield of Europe was broken. Nature and the enemies of the empire seemed to sense this weakness. From every direction, threats began to pour in across the borders. During the 9th century, the rivers of France and Germany became highways for destruction. The Vikings, sailing their long, shallow draft ships, pushed deep inland. They did not stay on the coast. They rowed up the Seine. They rowed up the Loire. They struck at the heart of the country, burning monasteries and looting villages that had never known war before. At the same time, from the vast plains of the east, the Magyars arrived. They were masters of the horse, conducting lightning-fast cavalry raids that devastated the German lands. They struck before a defense could be mustered and vanished before a counterattack could be launched. And from the south, Saracen pirates raided the Mediterranean coasts, disrupting the ancient trade routes that had kept the economy alive. The people looked to their king for protection, but the king was far away. The central monarchy, with its slow-moving armies and heavy infantry, simply lacked the speed to defend local villages. By the time the royal army arrived, the Vikings were gone, and the village was nothing but ash. In the year 864, King Charles the Bald tried to regain control. He issued the Edict of Peiters. This law commanded that all private fortifications built without a royal license must be destroyed. He feared that local lords would become too powerful, but the law was ignored. It was a piece of paper against a tidal wave of violence. The reality on the ground was simple. If the king could not protect you, you had to protect yourself. This is where the shift occurred. Power began to drain away from the center and pool into the hands of local strongmen, counts and dukes, who were originally just appointed officials, began to usurp royal authority. They took the concept of the ban. The ban was the ancient right to command and to punish. It was the king's right. But now, local lords claimed it for themselves. They became the law in their own valleys. The old world was fading. The great Roman road networks, once the arteries of the empire, were broken and overgrown. A traveler might walk past a rusted Roman milestone, completely hidden by weeds, a relic of a time when travel was safe. Now, communities were isolated. They were islands in a sea of chaos. In this vacuum, a new figure emerged. The castellan. This was the independent castleholder. He was not a king. He was often a rough, violent man, but he had a sword and he had a plan. Imagine the sight of smoke pillars rising from distant villages. It is a clear autumn day. You are working in the fields. Suddenly, the church bells begin to ring. It is not the slow, rhythmic toll of the call to prayer. It is a discord of alarm. It is the sound of panic. You look up and see the smoke. You know what it means. The raiders are here. Standing in that open, undefended field, the feeling of helplessness is overwhelming. There are no walls. There is no army. The only option is to run. You grab your children. You leave your home. You flee into the cold, muddy reality of the deep forests. You hide in the brambles, shivering as the night falls, hoping the raiders pass you by. This was the daily reality for thousands of people. Fear was the constant companion. And from this chaos, a new solution emerged from the earth itself. The solution was not a palace. It was a bunker. It was the motte and bailey. This was an architectural revolution born of necessity. The local lords needed a fortress, and they needed it now. They could not wait 10 years for a stonemason to carve blocks of granite. They needed something they could build in weeks, and so they turned to the most abundant materials available. They turned to the earth beneath their feet and the wood in the forests. The design was deceptively simple, yet brilliantly effective. It consisted of two main parts. The first was the motte. This was a massive, artificial mound of earth. It was a man-made hill. Hundreds of workers would dig a circular ditch, throwing the earth inward to create a pile that could stand anywhere from 5 to 15 meters high. To prevent this massive pile of dirt from slumping or collapsing, they had to understand soil mechanics. They layered clay and rock, packing it down tight to create a stable platform. It was grueling, backbreaking work. You can imagine the rhythmic thud of hundreds of wooden shovels hitting the dirt day after day. On the flattened summit of this mound, they built a tower. This was the keep. It was built of heavy timber. It was a watchtower and a final refuge. From this height, a lookout could see the enemy coming for miles. Below the motte was the bailey. This was a large, enclosed courtyard at the base of the mound. This was where life happened. It contained the stables, the workshops, the grain stores, and the living quarters for the garrison and the animals. Surrounding the entire complex was a palisade. This was a tall, sturdy fence made of sharpened logs. Imagine the smell of raw pine sap oozing from the freshly cut timber. The logs were driven deep into the earth, creating a wall that a horse could not jump and a man could not easily climb. Connecting the bailey to the motte was a flying bridge. This was a steep wooden gangway that led from the courtyard up to the tower on the mound. It was designed to be defended. If the enemy breached the palisade and entered the bailey, the defenders could retreat up the bridge to the high tower and pull the bridge up behind them. We know exactly what this construction looked like because of the Bayeux tapestry. This famous embroidery depicts the invasion of England in 1066. In one scene, We see the soldiers of William the Conqueror building a motte at Hastings. We see men with shovels. We see the layers of earth rising. It shows us that these were rapid, tactical structures, but they were formidable. Around the base of the mound, deep ditches or moats were dug. This added to the height of the walls and made it incredibly difficult for an attacker to approach. To attack a motte and bailey, you had to cross a ditch, climb a steep bank, breach a wooden wall, fight through the courtyard, climb a steep mound under fire, and then try to burn down a tower. It was a nightmare for any attacker. For the people inside, it was cramped, but it was safe. Imagine the claustrophobic safety inside that dark wooden tower during a storm. The wind howls outside, rattling the shutters, but the thick timber walls hold firm. You are high above the ground. You are safe from the mud. From the top of the motte, the Lord could look down over the thatched roofs of the bailey. He could see his horses. He could see his soldiers. The structure was defensive, yes, but it was also a symbol. It told everyone in the valley that he was above them. He was the master of the high ground. With the structure in place, the social landscape began to shift permanently. The castle was not just a building. It was a machine that created a new social reality. We call this reality feudalism. Now, historians will tell you that the word feudalism is a later invention. The people of the 10th century did not walk around saying they lived in a feudal system. But the system itself was very real. It was a brutally simple exchange. It was a trade of freedom for life. The peasants, the vast majority of the population, became serfs. They worked the land. They grew the wheat. They sheared the sheep. In exchange, they were allowed to retreat inside the bailey when the Vikings or the Magyars attacked. They gave their labor and their liberty to the Lord, and in return, the Lord gave them physical protection. This created the manorial system. The economy centered entirely around the Lord's estate. The castle was the hub of the wheel. To enforce this system, the Lord retained a group of professional warriors. In the Latin documents of the time, they were called milites. We know them as knights. These were men who did not work the fields. Their only job was to fight. They garrisoned the castle. They patrolled the perimeter. Imagine the metallic clink of early chainmail as these men walked the ramparts. It was the sound of authority. The castle became the center of everything. It was the judicial center. If two peasants had a dispute over a property line or a stolen cow, they did not go to a royal judge. They went to the castle. The Lord sat in his hall, and he decided the outcome. The atmosphere in that hall would have been smoky and dim, lit by a central fire. The Lord's word was final. The castle was also the bank. The grain was stored there. In a time of famine, the Lord controlled the food supply. This gave him ultimate power over the population. If you wanted to eat, you had to be in the Lord's favor. Society was divided into the three estates. There were those who prayed, the clergy. There were those who fought, the nobility. And there were those who worked, the peasantry. The castle was the physical manifestation of this divide. The bond between the Lord and his knights was sealed with rituals. The most famous was the ceremony of homage. A vassal, a lesser noble, or a knight would kneel before his lord. He would place his clasped hands between the hands of the Lord. He would promise his loyalty. He would promise to fight. In return, the Lord would grant him a fief. This was a grant of land. The land provided the income the knight needed to buy his horse and his armor. It was a military society organized for survival. The visual of the castle looming constantly on the horizon of the peasant's field was a reminder of this order. Every time a farmer looked up from his plow, he saw the mound, he saw the tower. He knew that his life depended on the man inside that tower. Imagine the sound of the drawbridge lowering at dawn. The heavy chains rattle, the wood creaks, the bridge hits the earth with a thud. It signals the start of the workday. It signals that the castle is open for business. It was a system that brought order to chaos, but at the cost of freedom. Castles allowed a small number of warriors to control a large population. However, wood rots and burns. Ambition demanded something more permanent. The Motte and Bailey was a brilliant short-term solution, but it had a fatal flaw: wood burns. Fire was the greatest threat to the early castle. A flaming arrow, a torch thrown during a raid, or even an accidental kitchen fire could turn a wooden fortress into a pile of ash in an hour. As the chaos of the invasions settled down, and as the lords became wealthier and more secure, they began to look for something that would last. They turned to stone. This transition marked a change in mindset. Wood is temporary. Stone is forever. When a lord decided to build in stone, he was making a statement. He was saying that he was not just passing through. He was saying that he and his family intended to rule this land until the end of time. One of the great pioneers of this new age was Fulk Nerra, the Count of Anjou. He lived around the year 1000. He was a violent, pious, and energetic man known as the Black Falcon. He spent his life fighting his neighbors and building castles. He was one of the first to commit to stone on a massive scale. One of the oldest standing stone keeps is the Dungeon of Langier, built in the 990s. It is a ruin now, but it still stands. These early stone keeps were not the fairy tale castles with round towers and pointed roofs that we see in movies. They were grim, rectangular blocks. They were massively thick. The walls could be 10 feet deep. They were built for pure defense. There were very few windows, and those that existed were merely narrow slits for shooting arrows. The interior would have been dark and cold. The entrance to these stone keeps was never on the ground floor. That would be too easy to batter down. The door was usually on the first floor, 5 or 6 meters up the wall. To get in, you had to climb a wooden staircase or a ladder. In times of danger, the ladder was pulled up, leaving the door completely inaccessible. Building in stone was incredibly expensive. It required skilled labor. You needed masons who knew how to cut rock. You needed mortar. You needed transport. Often the builders would cannibalize history. They would find nearby Roman ruins, old temples or walls that had collapsed. They would take the cut stones, known as spolia, and reuse them in the new castle. It was a literal rebuilding of the new world from the bones of the old. Limestone and granite became the preferred materials, depending on what the local geology provided. Imagine the cold touch of rough-hewn limestone in the morning frost. It feels unyielding. It feels eternal. The construction site of a stone castle was a place of immense noise and industry. The sound of iron chisels ringing against rock echoed through the valley from dawn until dusk. The dust and grit floated in the air around the mason's lodge. Oxen dragged heavy sleds of stone up the hill. The result was a shell keep. Sometimes, the Lord would simply replace the wooden palisade on top of the motte with a ring of stone. Other times, they built the great square towers. The psychological impact of these structures was immense. A wooden tower feels like a house. A stone tower feels like a mountain. Imagine the intimidating shadow cast by a square stone tower at sunset. It stretches across the valley, darkening the village below. It is a shadow that says, "I am here to stay." Standing behind a 10-foot thick wall, you feel a sensation of permanence and invincibility. An arrow cannot hurt you, fire cannot hurt you. You are encased in the earth itself. As stone replaced wood, the castle began to evolve into a complex machine of war. Before we ascend the steps of these great stone towers, I have a question for you. Is there a specific castle, perhaps one from a legend, or one you have visited, whose story you would love for me to tell in a future video? Let me know in the comments. I always find inspiration in your suggestions. Inside these formidable walls, a vibrant and crowded life unfolded. But before we step into the warmth of the hall, we must understand the cold, imposing shell that contained it. We must look to the white stone that changed the skyline of history. The story of the great stone keeps begins with a conquest. When William the Conqueror landed in England in 1066, he brought with him more than just an army of knights. He brought a new architectural language. The Saxons were accustomed to wood. Their halls were timber, warm and low. But the Normans were different. They were builders of stone, and they intended to write their dominion across the landscape in a script that could not be erased by fire or time. Shortly after his victory, William began construction on a fortress that would terrify and awe the population of London. It was the White Tower. Today, it sits at the center of the Tower of London complex, a museum piece. But imagine it in the year 1078. It was a skyscraper in a city of huts. It rose 90 feet into the air. To the locals, it must have looked like a mountain that had been carved by giants. To build it, William did not trust the local stone. He looked back to his home. He imported boatload after boatload of canstone from France. This was a creamy, high-quality limestone, superior to anything found near London. It was shipped across the turbulent channel, hauled up the Thames, and stacked block by block. When it was finished, they whitewashed the exterior with lime. In the midday sun, the tower would have gleamed with a blinding brilliance. It was a beacon of the new order. It shouted to everyone who saw it, "The Normans are here, and they are not leaving." These Norman keeps established a specific style. They were distinctively square. They were massive cubes of masonry, with a turret rising from each of the four corners. The walls were incredibly thick, sometimes 15 feet at the base. This was not just a wall. It was a geological feature. But a square keep has a weakness: the entrance. If you can batter down the door, the castle is yours. So, the Norman architects designed a solution called the forebuilding. This was a smaller stone structure attached to the side of the main keep. It protected the entrance staircase. To get to the main door, an attacker had to fight his way up a narrow, exposed flight of steps, exposed to arrows from above, and then breach a reinforced door before he even reached the keep itself. Once inside, the defensive thinking continued in every detail. Consider the spiral staircase. In almost every Norman castle, the stone stairs turn in a clockwise direction as they ascend. This was not a random choice. It was a calculated, engineered advantage. Most soldiers are right-handed. They hold their sword in the right hand and their shield in the left. If you are an attacker fighting your way up the stairs, the central stone pillar of the staircase blocks your right arm. You cannot swing your sword effectively. You are cramped. You are vulnerable. But the defender, coming down the stairs, has the wide outer curve of the wall on his right. He has room to swing. His body is protected by the central pillar. A single skilled knight, standing on a clockwise spiral stair, could hold back an army. Yet, the White Tower was not just a bunker. It was a palace and a place of worship. On the second floor, built directly into the structure, is the Chapel of St. John. It is one of the most beautiful examples of Norman architecture in existence. Heavy, round stone pillars line the aisle. Smooth arches curve overhead. It is a space of profound silence and strength. It shows us that for the Norman lords, faith and war were not separate things. They were woven together into the same stone fabric. God was their shield, and the castle was their sword. Life in these keeps was vertical. Today, we live in houses that spread out horizontally. But in a keep, your status determined your altitude. The basement levels were for storage. This was the domain of rats, barrels of wine, sacks of grain, and the dungeon. It was dark, smelling of damp earth and vinegar. Above that was the garrison level, where the soldiers lived. Above that was the great hall, the public space, and at the very top, far above the noise and the smell, were the private chambers of the Lord. This was the layout of Rochester Castle, another towering example of the age. To support the floors in such a massive open space, they built a thick cross wall that ran right through the center of the keep, dividing each floor into two halves. This wall helped carry the weight of the massive timber beams that made up the floor. But what about the practicalities of life? What about sanitation? The Norman engineers thought of this too. They built latrines, known as garderobes, directly into the thickness of the walls. These were small chambers with a stone seat and a chute that emptied out through the external wall, usually into the moat or a cesspit below. The name garderobe actually means a place to keep clothes. People believed that the pungent smell of the ammonia from the latrine would keep moths away from their wool and furs, so they would hang their expensive clothes in the latrine chamber. Defense was everywhere. Inside the walls themselves, there were narrow corridors called mural passages. These allowed the garrison to move quickly from one side of the castle to the other without having to cross the crowded rooms. A soldier could vanish into a wall and reappear behind the enemy. Imagine standing in one of these passages. The air is cold and still. The stone is rough against your shoulder. You look through a narrow arrow slit. It frames the world outside the conquered city, the river, the distant woods. You are separated from that world by 10 feet of rock. The wind whistles through the slit, a high, lonely sound. There is no glass in the windows, only wooden shutters to keep out the rain. It is a drafty, echoing, imposing place. It is a place built for survival, not for comfort. But humans cannot live on survival alone. Even in the hardest stone shell, there must be a heart. And the heart of the castle was the great hall. This was the room where everything happened. In a great stone keep, it might be on the 3rd floor. In a later castle, it might be a separate building in the courtyard, but the function was always the same. It was the theater of feudal life. The great hall was cavernous. It was open to the roof rafters. You would look up and see the heavy oak beams, blackened by years of smoke. In the center of the room, on a stone hearth, a massive fire burned day and night. There were no chimneys in the early days. The smoke rose up and drifted toward a louvre, a lantern-like opening in the roof, but much of it stayed in the room. Imagine the atmosphere. A haze of blue wood smoke hangs in the air. It stings your eyes slightly, but you get used to it. It smells of oak and ash, Combined with this is the smell of roasting meat, of wet dogs, of unwashed bodies, and of dried herbs. The floor was not bare stone. It was strewn with rushes, dried reeds, or straw. To mask the smells of daily life, they would scatter sweet-smelling herbs among the rushes. Lavender, meadowsweet, and thyme would release their scent when you walked on them. At one end of the hall, there was a raised platform made of wood. This was the dais. On it sat the high table. This is where the Lord, his family, and his honored guests sat. They looked down on the rest of the hall. This was a physical demonstration of the hierarchy. If you sat at the high table, you were powerful. If you sat on the benches in the main hall, you were a servant or a soldier. Behind the high table, usually hidden by a screen or a heavy curtain, was the door to the Lord's solar. This was the private retiring room. It was the only place where the Lord could find privacy. It was a bedroom, a sitting room, and a solar a place of sun where the family could escape the constant gaze of the household. But back in the hall, life was communal. The walls were cold stone, which naturally sucked the heat out of the room. To combat this, and to display wealth, the lords hung rich tapestries. These were not just decorations, they were insulation. They created a pocket of air against the wall that helped keep the room warm. The tapestries depicted scenes of hunting, of mythology, or of battle. In the flickering firelight, the figures on the tapestries would seem to move, casting long, dancing shadows. Dining was a performance. There were no plates as we know them. Instead, people used trenchers. A trencher was a thick slice of stale, coarse bread. The meat and sauce were served directly onto the bread. The bread absorbed the juices. At the end of the meal, the gravy-soaked trencher could be eaten, or more often, given to the poor or thrown to the dogs. And there were always dogs. Greyhounds and hunting dogs roamed freely in the great hall. They slept by the fire. They wandered under the tables, waiting for a bone or a piece of gristle to fall. The floor was a chaotic landscape of bones, rushes, and sleeping hounds. Entertainment was constant. While the Lord ate, minstrels played the lute or the harp. Jesters tumbled and told crude jokes. Storytellers recited the great epics of Arthur and Charlemagne. The hall was filled with sound, the murmur of low conversation, the crackle of the fire, the tuning of an instrument, the sudden burst of laughter. At night, the transformation was total. The tables were cleared away, pallets and mattresses were dragged out. The servants, the retainers, and the lower-ranking knights slept right there on the floor of the great hall. It was a slumber party of 50 or 100 people. The fire would die down to glowing embers. The heavy breathing of sleeping men and dogs would fill the space. It was a life lived shoulder to shoulder. There was safety in numbers and warmth in the crowd. But this domestic peace, this warm, smoky, communal life, was always fragile. It existed only because the walls were thick. It was always threatened by the evolving science of destruction. Outside the gate, the minds of engineers were hard at work, devising new ways to smash the stone to pieces. The High Middle Ages saw an arms race. It was a contest between the castle builder and the siege engineer. Every time a wall got thicker, a catapult got stronger. Every time a tower rose higher, a mine went deeper. The king of this destruction was the trebuchet. Before the 12th century, siege engines were powered by tension-twisted ropes or bent wood. They were limited. But the trebuchet used a counterweight. It was a triumph of physics. Imagine a massive wooden arm pivoted on a high frame. On the short end of the arm, hangs a gigantic box filled with tons of lead or rocks. On the long end is a sling holding the projectile. Men would use winches to crank the long arm down, lifting the heavy counterweight into the air. The tension in the machine was palpable. The wood groaned, the ropes stretched tight. When the trigger was pulled, the counterweight dropped. Gravity took over. The long arm whipped up, dragging the sling with it. At the perfect moment, the sling released, hurling a stone weighing hundreds of pounds. The sound was terrifying. A creak, a heavy whoosh, and then the sickening thud of stone hitting stone. The impact would shake the foundation of the castle. You could feel the vibration in the floor of the great hall. It was a rhythmic, mechanical dismantling of safety. But sometimes the greatest danger was silent. It was the mine. If a castle was built on soil and not solid rock, it was vulnerable to sapping. Attackers would dig a tunnel, starting far away and aiming for the corner of the square keep. The miners worked in the dark, cramping claustrophobia of the earth. As they dug, they propped up the tunnel roof with wooden beams. When they reached the corner of the castle foundation, they would excavate the earth out from under the stone, replacing the dirt with wood props. Then they would fill the tunnel with brushwood, straw, and pig fat. They would set it on fire. As the wood burned, the props would fail, the tunnel would collapse, and the massive stone corner of the keep, suddenly having nothing to support it, would crash down into the crater. The defenders fear this above all else. They would place bowls of water on the ground in the cellars, watching for ripples that would indicate digging below. They would dig counter mines, breaking into the enemy tunnels to fight desperate, dark battles with pickaxes and daggers in the suffocating gloom. At the gates, the threat was the battering ram, sometimes called the pig or the cat. This was a huge log with an iron head suspended from chains inside a covered shed on wheels. The shed was covered in wet hides to prevent fire. The attackers would wheel it up to the gate. Inside, men would swing the log back and forth, thud, thud, thud. It was a sound that drove defenders mad. To stop them, the defenders used gravity. They had murder holes openings in the ceiling of the gate passage. Through these, they dropped heavy stones. They poured boiling water. They poured hot sand. Sand was horrific. It got inside the armor and burned the skin like sandpaper. Contrary to the movies, they rarely used boiling oil. Oil was expensive. You didn't waste it on soldiers. You used it for lamps and cooking. Sometimes, the defenders built hoardings. These were wooden galleries that hung out over the top of the stone battlements. They had holes in the floor, allowing archers to shoot straight down at the men trying to scale the walls with ladders. But even with all this technology, the most effective siege weapon was time, starvation. If you could surround a castle and cut off the food, it was only a matter of months. The distinct sound of a siege engine winding up created psychological terror, but the gnawing pain of hunger broke the will. The fall of Chateau Galliard in 1204 was a shock to the system. It was the strongest castle of its day, built by Richard the Lionheart, but it fell to the French king Philip Augustus. It proved that even the greatest square keeps and linear walls could be breached. This threat forced architects to rethink the very shape of the castle. The square keep, for all its majesty, had to die. The problem with a square tower is the corners. A sharp corner is a weak point. It is easy to break off with a battering ram. It is easy to undermine. And worst of all, it creates a blind spot. If you stand on top of a square tower, you cannot see the ground directly at the corner. An attacker can hide there, safe from your arrows, and chip away at the stone. The solution was the curve, the round tower. In the late 12th and 13th centuries, the castle transformed. The keeps became cylindrical. A round tower has no corners to mine. It has no blind spots, and most importantly, it deflects missiles. When a stone from a trebuchet hits a flat wall, it delivers all its energy into the impact, shattering the stone. But when it hits a curved wall, it glances off. The energy is deflected. The wall survives. This was the age of the curtain wall. The focus shifted away from the single great keep in the middle. Now the defense moved to the perimeter. The architects enclosed a much larger area with a high, thick wall, and along this wall they placed round flanking towers at regular intervals. This allowed for something called enfilade fire. If an attacker tried to place a ladder against the wall, the archers in the towers to his left and right could shoot at him from the sides. He was caught in a crossfire. The wall protected itself. The entrance, always the weakest point, was hulked up into the gatehouse. This became a castle within a castle. It was a massive, twin-towered fortress. It was guarded by a portcullis. This was a heavy grille of oak reinforced with iron lattice. It hung in vertical grooves in the stone. Imagine the heavy, rhythmic clanking of the portcullis chain as it rises. It is the sound of heavy industry. If an enemy approached, the guard could drop the portcullis in seconds, slamming a wall of iron between the castle and the threat. The drawbridge evolved to, instead of just being pulled up by chains, it used heavy counterweights and pivots. A single guard could raise a massive bridge with one hand, simply by knocking out a pin. At the top of the walls, the wooden hoardings were replaced by stone machicolations. These were stone galleries jutting out from the wall, with permanent holes in the floor for dropping missiles. They were fireproof. They were permanent. Some castles added a barbican. This was a fortified outpost that extended out in front of the gate, forcing the enemy to fight through a narrow chute of death before they even reached the drawbridge. King Philip II of France, known as Augustus, was a master of this. He standardized the design. He built round towers all over France. The castle had become a sophisticated machine. Imagine walking the battlements of one of these new fortresses. To your left, the smooth curve of the stone deflects the wind. To your right, the dark water of the moat reflects the gray sky. You look out over the landscape. You see the wall stretching out, punctuated by tower after tower. It feels endless. It feels solid. Standing behind the new machicolations, looking down through the stone openings, you feel a sense of invulnerability. The square keep was a desperate bunker. The curtain wall castle is a system of control. It is proactive. It dominates the land. The transition was complete. The wood was gone. The square corners were gone. The castle had reached its architectural maturity. It was ready for its golden age. As we imagine walking the ramparts of these impregnable fortresses, feeling the rough stone under our hands, I wonder, if you had to choose, would you prefer the safety of the high tower or the bustling energy of the great hall below? It is a choice between solitude and community. Let's hold that thought as we move into the era of the concentric castle. The dust of the early sieges has settled. The frantic energy of the first assaults has faded into the pages of the past. We have witnessed the birth of the castle from the timber of the motte and bailey. We have seen the stone keep rise like a defiant fist against the sky. But now we move forward in time. We drift into the 13th and 14th centuries. This is the Golden Age. This is the era where the fortress transcends mere function and becomes a monument. The structures we are about to explore are not just defensive positions. They are masterpieces. They are vast, complex, and overwhelmingly powerful. The air here is different. It is not filled with the panic of a sudden raid. It is heavy with the weight of permanence. The pacing of the world seems to slow down in the shadow of these giants. Let us walk among them. We begin our journey by casting our gaze far to the east. We leave the green fields of Europe behind for a moment. We travel across the churning waters of the Mediterranean. We find ourselves under the relentless, blinding sun of the Levant. The heat here is a physical weight. It presses down on the arid landscape. The air shimmers above the dusty ground. In this harsh and alien terrain, the European crusaders encountered a new level of military engineering. They learned hard lessons from the Byzantine Empire and the Arab architects who had guarded these lands for centuries. And the greatest fruit of this learning is a fortress that sits atop a ridge in Syria. It is known as Crack des Chevaliers. Imagine approaching it from the valley floor. It does not look like a building. It looks like a mountain that has been carved by the hands of giants. The limestone walls are pale, almost white. They reflect the intense sunlight with a brilliance that can hurt the eyes. This is the archetype of the Crusader castle. It is the standard by which all others are measured. It is not merely a home for a lord. It is a headquarters. It is a machine for living and fighting. At its height, this single structure could house a garrison of 2,000 soldiers. It also held their horses. It held their armor. It held enough grain and oil to last for years. It was a city contained within a stone shell. As we draw closer, the sheer scale becomes dizzying. The walls tower above us. But it is not just their height that impresses, it is their depth. The architects here perfected the concept of concentric defense. This was a revolutionary idea. In the past, a castle might have had a single curtain wall. If the enemy breached it, the castle was lost. Here, there are walls within walls. A double line of defense wraps around the hilltop. The outer wall is formidable enough. It is thick and studded with round towers. But the inner wall is the true marvel. The inner wall rises much higher than the outer one. This is a stroke of tactical genius. It means that the defenders on the inner, higher wall can shoot over the heads of their comrades on the lower wall. They can rain arrows and bolts down upon an attacking force from 2 levels simultaneously. The volume of fire is doubled. The air would be thick with projectiles. It creates a terrifying verticality to the defense. Even if an enemy were to capture the outer wall, they would find themselves trapped in the killing zone between the 2 rings. They would be exposed to fire from the towering inner ward with nowhere to hide. We walk towards the base of the fortifications. We notice that the walls do not rise straight from the ground. At the bottom, there is a massive, sloping skirt of stone. This is called a talus. It is a simple feature, but incredibly effective. It serves 2 purposes. First, it thickens the base of the wall. This makes it nearly impossible for miners to tunnel underneath and collapse the tower. Second, it acts as a deflector. When the defenders drop heavy stones from the battlements above, the stones hit the sloped talus and shatter. The fragments explode outward like shrapnel, devastating any soldiers trying to place ladders at the base. It turns gravity into a weapon. We approach the entrance. It is not a straight path. The gatehouse is designed to confuse and stall. It features a bent entrance. To enter, you must turn right, then left, navigating a dark, enclosed passage. This prevents a charging cavalry force from smashing through with momentum. They are forced to slow down, they are forced to expose their flanks, and all the while, hidden holes in the ceiling allow the defenders to pour sand or water or pitch onto the intruders. But let us step inside. The transition is abrupt. We leave the blinding glare of the Syrian sun and enter the cool, echoing vastness of the interior. The temperature drops immediately. The Hospitaller Knights managed this fortress. They were a monastic military order. They were warrior monks, and the architecture reflects this dual nature. There is a sense of military discipline, but also a profound monastic silence. We walk through the vaulted stables. The ceiling is high, supported by graceful stone arches. The sound of our footsteps echoes in the gloom. We can imagine the smell of hundreds of war horses that once stood here. We can hear the rustle of straw and the clinking of iron bridles. Deep beneath our feet, there is another sound. It is the slow, rhythmic dripping of water. In this dry land, water is life. The castle is built over massive cisterns. They are caverns carved into the rock, filled with water, brought in by aqueducts. These cisterns hold millions of liters. They ensured that the garrison could survive a siege for 5 years without thirst. The thought of that dark, cool water waiting in the deep silence is strangely soothing. We climb to the highest tower. The view is breathtaking. We can see for miles across the haze of the landscape. We see the distant hills. We see the dusty roads that armies once marched upon. From up here, the world feels vast and empty. The castle feels like a ship of stone floating on a sea of dry earth. It is a place of solitude. It is a place of prayer and watchfulness. The innovations forged here in the heat of the East did not stay here. They were carried home. The kings and lords who marveled at these walls took the blueprints back to the green hills of Europe. They were about to change the landscape forever. We travel now to the misty, verdant valleys of Wales. The air here is cool and damp. The sky is often a bruised purple or a weeping gray. It is the late 13th century. King Edward I sits on the English throne. He is a man of iron ambition. He is determined to subdue the rebellious princes of Wales. To do this, he does not rely solely on armies. He relies on architecture. He commissions the construction of the Iron Ring. This is a chain of castles, unlike anything seen in Britain before. They are the direct descendants of the lessons learned in the East. The mastermind behind this project is a genius of masonry named Master James of St. George. He is the greatest military architect of his age. He treats stone like clay. He designs fortresses that are not just strong, but mathematically perfect. We stand before the unfinished masterpiece of Beaumars. It sits on the island of Anglesey. It is low and squat, hugging the marshy ground. It is considered the perfect concentric castle. Its symmetry is beautiful. Picture the shape. It is a square within a square, but the corners are softened, rounded into drums of stones. The walls are thick, impossibly thick, like crack-day chevaliers. The inner ring towers over the outer. The killing zones are precisely calculated. There is no blind spot. There is no shadow where an enemy can hide. The water of the moat surrounds it completely. It reflects the gray sky and the gray walls, creating a seamless image of impregnability. It feels almost organic, like a shell that has grown from the earth itself. Further along the coast, we find Carnarvon Castle. This one is different. It is grander. It is a statement of imperial power. The towers here are not round, they are polygonal. They have many sides, creating sharp, geometric shadows that shift with the sun. The stone is banded with different colors. This is a deliberate choice. It is meant to echo the legendary walls of Constantinople. King Edward is trying to link his rule to the ancient empires of Rome and Byzantium. He is weaving a story into the stone. These castles share a crucial feature. They are built directly on the sea. We can smell the salt spray mixing with the cold scent of wet stone. We can hear the tide lapping against the foundations. This was strategic. If the Welsh rebels cut off the roads, the castle could still be resupplied by ship. The sea was their lifeline. The gates facing the water are massive, fortified docks. We can imagine the creaking of wooden hulls against the stone quays, the unloading of barrels of wine and salted pork under the cover of night. The defensive details are minute and terrifying. The arrow loops, the thin slits in the walls are no longer simple vertical lines. They are cross-shaped. They are designed for the crossbow. This weapon was becoming dominant. The horizontal slit allows the archer to track a moving target. The vertical slit allows for elevation. The recesses in the wall are widened, allowing 2 or 3 archers to shoot from a single loop, creating a fan of fire. The cost of this iron ring was astronomical. It drained the English treasury. It effectively bankrupted the crown. But as we stand in the shadow of the Eagle Tower at Carnarvon, looking out over the misty waters, the cost seems irrelevant. The sheer dominance of the structure is absolute. It makes a person feel incredibly small. The walls are mountain cliffs. The towers are giants. The mist rolls in from the Welsh mountains, shrouding the turrets in a white veil. It softens the hard edges of the stone. It turns the fortress into a ghost, a silent sentinel watching over a subdued land. These castles represented the ultimate fusion of royal power and military engineering. They were the peak of the art form. But time is a river. It flows around obstacles, and it smooths down the sharpest edges. As the centuries turned, the desperate need for such impregnable defenses began to wane. The internal wars of nations settled into uneasy pieces. The borders solidified, and with this shift, the castle began to change from within. We move now into the 14th and 15th centuries. The grim fortress is evolving. It is becoming a palace. The first thing we notice is the light. In the old keeps, the windows were tiny slits designed to keep arrows out. The interiors were permanently gloomy, lit only by flickering torches. But now, the windows are growing. They are expanding. They are being glazed with glass. This was a luxury previously reserved for cathedrals. Now, sunlight streams into the great halls. It paints the stone floors in pools of gold and blue and red. The fear of a projectile entering the window has been replaced by the desire to see the garden outside. The heat changes too. In the old days, a fire burned in an open hearth in the center of the room. The smoke drifted up to the rafters, choking the air and blackening the lungs. Now we see the widespread adoption of the fireplace and the chimney. The fire is moved to the wall, the smoke is carried away, the air becomes clear. A fireplace with a carved stone mantel becomes a centerpiece of the room. We can imagine the warm glow of the embers lighting up a private bedchamber. We can feel the radiant heat on our faces as we sit in a hubbaked chair. Comfort, becomes the priority. The communal life of the great hall, where the Lord slept near his servants, is fading. Private chambers multiply. There are Solar's private sitting rooms where the family can retreat. There are dedicated wardrobes. There are separate bedrooms. The walls are no longer bare, cold stone. They are hung with thick woolen tapestries. These tapestries trap the heat. They dampen the echoes. They tell stories of hunts and romances in woven thread. We can almost feel the soft texture of a velvet cushion on a window seat, a place to sit and read in the quiet of the afternoon. The architecture itself becomes decorative. The ceilings are vaulted with intricate stone ribs, spreading out like fans. This is not for strength, it is for beauty. Brick begins to appear. At Tattershall Castle, we see a great tower built not of grey stone, but of red brick. It is warm and inviting. It speaks of wealth, not war. Outside, the cramped baileys are transformed. The mud and the stables are moved away. In their place, we find gardens. These are the pleasance areas. We can smell the scent of roses drifting up from the courtyard. We see neat beds of herbs and flowers. We see fountains. The castle is no longer a cage to keep the world out. It is a sanctuary to keep beauty in. Windsor Castle evolves during this time into a luxurious royal residence, a place of feasts and tournaments rather than sieges. We can hear the quiet scratching of a quill in a dedicated study. We can hear the soft rustle of silk dresses in the corridors. The heavy iron boots of the garrison have been replaced by the soft shoes of courtiers. The keep has evolved into the tower house tall, imposing, but built for a refined life. The era of the impregnable fortress was ending. The stone was softening. The castle was preparing to lay down its shield. And now we reach the twilight. We stand at the precipice of the modern world. The main narrative arc of the castle comes to its conclusion. The end did not come with a whimper, but with a bang, a very loud, thunderous bang. The invention of gunpowder and the development of the cannon changed everything. The tall, vertical walls of the medieval castle were designed to stop ladders and siege towers. They were designed to deflect arrows, but they were brittle. When a heavy iron ball, fired from a bombard, struck a high stone wall, the wall did not deflect it, it shattered. The vibration alone could bring a tower down. In 1453, the great walls of Constantinople, the inspiration for Caernarfon, the walls that had stood for 1,000 years, fell to the Ottoman cannons. The message was clear. The age of the vertical wall was over. Defense shifted to the earth itself. The new forts were low, squat, and star-shaped. They were made of thick mounds of earth that could absorb the impact of a cannonball. The majestic stone towers became obsolete overnight. They were dinosaur bones, left behind by a changing climate. At the same time, the political world was shifting. Monarchs began to centralize their power. They banned the private armies of the lords. They required a license to crenellate, permission to build a fortress, and they rarely granted it. The feudal bond, where a knight served a lord in exchange for land, dissolved. It was replaced by paid standing armies. The castle was no longer the center of military power. It was just a house. During the Wars of the Roses, many great castles were destroyed. They were slighted, deliberately damaged to prevent them from being used again. Roofs were stripped of their lead. Walls were breached, but many more were simply abandoned. The nobles moved into unfortified manor houses. They wanted light, air, and comfort. They wanted wide, defenseless windows that looked out over peaceful parks. We walk through the ruins of an abandoned castle. The silence is profound. It is the silence of a battleground that has been reclaimed by nature. We see the ivy crawling up the rough stone, gripping it tighter than any attacker ever did. We see moss softening the edges of the fallen blocks. Trees grow in the middle of the great hall, their branches reaching for the open sky where the roof once was. The moat is dry, filled with fallen leaves that rustle softly in the wind. The castle is repurposed. Some become prisons, dark and foreboding. Some become administrative centers, but most just stand there. As their military utility fades, something else begins to grow. The romance of the castle is born. Freed from the grim reality of war, they become symbols. They become icons of lineage, of prestige, of a chivalric past that perhaps never truly existed. They remain as emotional anchors in the landscape. The sun is setting now. It casts long shadows over the broken battlements. The view is peaceful. The landscape is no longer dominated by fear. The watchtowers are empty. The drawbridge is down permanently. The portcullis has rusted into its groove. The story of the castle's rise and fall is complete, but the stones still have secrets to whisper. They hold the memories of the thousands of lives lived within their embrace. And so, the drawbridge is raised for the final time, not to keep us out, but to secure the memories within. We have watched these structures rise from the earth, stand defiant against the sky, and finally soften into homes. The chaotic world of the early feudal age has settled into the pages of history, leaving behind these majestic stone sentinels as guardians of the past. As we leave the narrative of kings and conquests behind, let us linger a little longer in the quiet shadows of the walls. If you are still with me, settle deeper into your rest. There is no more fighting to be done, only the peaceful contemplation of what remains. We have walked through the corridors of history, witnessing the rise of kings and the fall of sieges. We have heard the clash of steel and the roar of fire. But now, as the smoke clears and the echoes of battle fade into the distance, we are left with something far more enduring. We are left with the silence. It is a heavy, profound silence that settles over the landscape like a thick winter blanket. In this quiet space, we turn our attention away from the dramatic arcs of human ambition and toward the physical reality of the structure itself. We look to the stone. It stands as a testament, not just to war, but to work, to the immense, slow, and rhythmic effort of construction that spans decades. The castle is not merely a fortress, it is a geological marvel, a mountain moved by human hands, piece by piece, from the deep earth to the high sky. Let us consider the economy of stone. Before a single banner could fly from a turret, there was the quarry. It begins with the sound of metal on rock, a slow, methodical chipping that rings out across the countryside. For years, this is the only sound. Master masons, men of immense intellect and geometrical precision, walked these quarry floors. They were not mere laborers. They were the highly paid architects of the medieval world, traveling across Europe with their templates and their compasses. They looked at a rough cliff face and saw the ghost of a tower waiting inside. The work of releasing that tower was slow. It was dangerous. It was expensive. Quarrymen drove iron wedges into natural fissures, hammering them in a rhythm that mimicked the beating of a heart. Crack by crack, the stone was separated from the bedrock. These were not small pebbles. They were monumental blocks, heavy with the weight of ages. And once they were free, the true cost began. Transport. In a world without engines, the movement of mass was the single greatest expense of castle building. An ox cart, creaking under the strain, could carry only a limited weight, perhaps a ton, perhaps less. The roads were poor, often turning to thick, impassable mud in the autumn rains. And so the oxen moved slowly. We can imagine their heavy, patient breathing, the steam rising from their flanks in the cool morning air, the slow, grinding rotation of the wooden wheels. To move enough stone for a great keep required not 10 carts, nor 100. It required thousands. It required a constant, flowing river of stone moving from the quarry to the site, day after day, year after year. The cost of fodder for the oxen alone could drain a treasury. And then there was the mortar. To bind these stones, men built kilns to burn limestone into quicklime. It was a chemical transformation driven by heat. The kilns burned day and night, consuming acres of forest to maintain the temperature. The air around the construction site would hang heavy with the powdery white dust of the lime. It coated the lungs and the skin of the workers. It was a dry, acrid smell, the scent of the earth being cooked into a liquid solid. As the walls rose, so did the scaffolding. It was a forest of timber clinging to the side of the masonry. There were no metal bolts to hold these platforms. Instead, they used hurdles of woven willow and hazel, lashed together with miles of hemp rope. The scaffold creaked in the wind. It shifted under the weight of the men. And upon these fragile wooden stages, the masons worked. They tapped their chisels with hypnotic regularity. Tap, tap, tap. They smoothed the rough faces of the ashlar blocks. They carved intricate moldings for the chapel doors. And on each stone, they left a secret mark, the banker mark. It was a simple geometric symbol, an arrow, a cross, a star, carved into the side of the block. This was not graffiti, it was accounting. It allowed the master mason to tally how many stones a man had cut so he could be paid his wages. Today, if you look closely at the ruined walls in the slanted light of evening, you can still see them. Little signatures of long-dead men preserved in the geology of the wall. Lifting these stones to the heavens required a machine of beautiful simplicity, the treadwheel crane. High atop the unfinished walls, a great wooden wheel, larger than a man, turned slowly against the sky. Inside the wheel, men walked. They walked an endless, stationary journey, their weight turning the axle, winding the rope, and lifting the block. The sound of the treadwheel was a low, groaning complaint of wood on wood. It was a sound of immense tension. The rope pulled tight. The stone hovered in the air, swaying gently, before being lowered with agonizing precision into its final resting place. This work could not happen year-round. The medieval construction calendar was dictated by the frost. When winter approached, the site would fall silent. Straw and dung were packed over the unfinished wall heads to protect the mortar from freezing and cracking. The masons went home. The oxen rested. The castle waited for the spring thaw to resume its slow climb toward the clouds. It is estimated that billions of tons of stone were moved across Europe in this manner. A single great castle could cost more than a king's entire annual income. It was a sinkhole of wealth, a massive investment of labor and resource, all solidified into a static, silent form. But beyond the economics, there was the science. As we drift deeper into the structure, we see the cold, hard logic of defense. Every angle, every slope, every shadow was calculated. This is the science of geometry applied to survival. Consider the base of the wall. It does not meet the ground at a right angle. Instead, it flares out in a sloping skirt of stone known as the talus or the batter. This was not merely for structural stability, though it helped prevent the heavy walls from sinking into the soft earth. Its primary purpose was far more kinetic. If a defender on the battlements dropped a stone straight down, it would not hit the dirt. It would strike the angled face of the talus and shatter, bouncing outward horizontally, spraying shrapnel into the legs of any attackers huddled at the base. It was a simple, brutal application of physics. Above, the skyline was broken by the rhythm of the battlements, merlons and crenels, the solid uprights and the empty spaces. This crenellation created a flickering pattern against the sky, a gap for the archer to loose his arrow, and a shield of stone to hide behind while he reloaded. Piercing the solid walls were the loopholes. In the early days, they were simple vertical slits, narrow on the outside, wide on the inside. This allowed the archer a wide field of view while presenting a tiny target to the enemy. As the centuries passed, the technology of war changed, and the stones changed with it. The slits grew crossbars, becoming cruciform shapes to accommodate the horizontal limbs of the crossbow. These are not just windows, they are mathematical firing arcs carved into the masonry. The entrance was the mouth of the beast, and it was guarded with layers of mechanical redundancy. We walk into the shadow of the gatehouse. Above us, the ceiling is pierced by holes. These are the murder holes, or meurtriers. Through these dark openings, defenders could rain down heavy rocks, scalding water, or burning sand upon anyone who breached the outer doors. The tunnel becomes a killing jar. Blocking the way was the portcullis. It was a heavy grid of oak, shod in iron spikes. It did not swing like a door. It dropped like a guillotine. It ran in deep stone grooves carved into the gatehouse walls. We can imagine the sound of it, rising the clatter of chains, the heavy thud of the counterweights shifting in the upper chamber. When it fell, it sealed the passage with the finality of a prison sentence. Even the stairs were weaponized. The spiral staircases of the great towers almost always turned in a clockwise direction as they ascended. This was not a random choice. It gave the advantage to the defender, who would be fighting downwards with his sword arm free. The attacker, fighting upwards, would have his sword arm blocked by the central pillar of the stair. And there were trick steps, a single step, uneven, slightly higher or lower than the others. In the chaos of a rush, an attacker's muscle memory would fail him. He would stumble, and in that moment of imbalance, the defense would hold. Outside the walls, the earth itself was sculpted. The barbican forced visitors to approach the gate in a zigzag pattern, exposing their flanks to fire. The glacis was a smooth, earthen slope leading up to the ditch, stripped of all cover, leaving an enemy exposed like an insect on a plate. And the water. The moat was not always a shimmering, romantic lake. Often, it was a wide, stagnant trench, engineered to prevent tunneling. Sappers could not dig under a wall if the earth above them was saturated with water. The moat was a barrier of liquid weight, still and dark, reflecting the towering stone above. It creates a picture of analytical perfection. A machine made of rock, but a machine cannot run itself. Within this geometry lived a complex hierarchy of people. This brings us to the invisible workforce. History remembers the kings and the knights. It remembers the lords and the ladies. But the castle functioned because of the hundreds of unseen hands that scrubbed, cooked, carried, and cleaned. The silence of the stone passageways today belies the constant, bustling hum of their daily lives. There was a title for every task. The strict stratification of medieval society was mirrored in the domestic staff. There was the ewer. His world was one of water, basins, and linen. It was his duty to ensure that warm water and dry towels were available for the washing of hands before meals. In a time without plumbing, the carrying of water was a constant, heavy labor. There was the pantler. He ruled the pantry. He was the keeper of the bread. He sliced the trencher-thick slabs of stale bread used as plate sand, oversaw the distribution of the loaves. His hands would be dusted with flour, his apron smelling of yeast. There was the butler, but he did not wait on tables in the modern sense. He was the master of the buttery, the storage place for the butts or barrels of wine and ale. He managed the liquid wealth of the household. The damp, cool smell of the cellar was his domain. Down in the courtyards, amidst the steam and the lye, were the laundresses. Often they were the only women permitted to live within the castle walls, aside from the high-born ladies. Their work was grueling, scrubbing heavy woolens and linens in great wooden vats, their hands red from the hot water and harsh soap. The rhythmic splash of wet cloth hitting the scrubbing boards would echo off the stone walls. And in the deepest night, the gong farmers began their work. They were the cleaners of the cesspits and latrines. It was a necessary, humble, and foul task, done under the cover of darkness, so the nobility would never have to witness the reality of waste. They moved like shadows, essential but ignored. In the stables, the marshal reigned supreme. He was responsible for the horses, the engines of medieval mobility. The air in his domain smelled of sweet hay, oiled leather, and manure. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the rasp of a currycomb, the jingling of bits and bridles. These were the sounds of the marshalsea. The spiritual life of the castle was tended by the chaplains. They lived in the quiet spaces, the chapels, and the scriptoriums. They handled the correspondence, dipping quill into ink, their scratching, writing the only sound in the room. Young pages and squires darted through the halls, carrying messages, polishing armor, learning the art of service and war. Their laughter and running footsteps added a layer of youthful energy to the solemn stone. Overseeing it all was the chamberlain. He managed the lord's private chambers and, crucially, his finances. He held the keys. He knew the secrets. Life for these people was not random. It was strictly regulated by the sun and the church bells. Matins, lauds, vespers. The bells rang out across the valley, dividing the day into segments of prayer and labor. The castle was a clockwork entity, and the servants were the gears that kept it turning. Their lives revolved around the changing seasons. The castle was not a hermetically sealed box. It was permeable to the weather. It breathed with the year. This brings us to the seasons of the stone. Winter was the season of endurance. The stone walls, so thick and formidable, became blocks of ice. The cold radiated from them. Shutters were closed tight against the howling winds. Heavy tapestries were hung not just for decoration, but to stop the drafts that whistled through the cracks. The castle turned inward. It was a time of isolation. The roads were impassable with snow or mud. The castle had to survive on what it had swallowed during the autumn. The cellars were stocked with salted meats, root vegetables, and pickled fish. Firewood was the most precious commodity. We can imagine the great hall in December, the only light coming from the roaring central hearth, the smoke drifting up toward the high rafters. The crackle of the logs was the only sound in a room dampened by snow on the roof. Spring brought the thaw. It was the season of water. Melting snow dripped from the gargoyles, creating curtains of water around the roofs. The moat swelled. It was a time of cleaning. The shutters were thrown open to let in the pale, fresh air. Repairs began on the masonry damaged by the frost. The sound of the hammer returned to the walls. Summer was the season of heat and dust. In the long days of July and August, the heat could be oppressive. The thick walls held the warmth, and without cross-ventilation, the air grew stale. But it was also the season of activity. It was the season of war. Armies moved when the grass was dry. The castle was at its most alert. The glint of sun on metal armor, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the narrow windows. Autumn was the harvest. The castle became a storehouse. Carts rumbled over the drawbridge day after day, laden with sacks of grain, barrels of apples, and carcasses of meat. The granaries were filled to the rafters. The smell of dry leaves and ripening fruit filled the baileys. It was a frantic race against the coming dark. Through it all, the constable watched. Even when the lord was away at court or on campaign, the castle never slept. The constable remained, the steady hand on the tiller, ensuring the watch was kept. The rain was collected in the cisterns, and the rhythm of the year was honored. The castle was a calendar of stone, marking the passage of time, not in hours, but in seasons. But time is the one enemy that stone cannot defeat. Eventually, the seasons reclaim everything. The soldiers leave, the fires go out, the roof falls in. This brings us to the romantic ruin. The afterlife of a castle is often longer than its life as a fortress. For many, the end came with violence, but not from foreign invaders. After civil wars, many great castles were slighted. This was a deliberate act of destruction. Parliamentarian forces would use gunpowder to blow out the side of a keep, or topple a main tower, ensuring it could never be used against them again. They broke the back of the stone beast. Then came the quiet looting. For local farmers, the ruined castle was a convenient quarry. Why cut new stone when there is a pile of perfectly shaped ashlar sitting on the hill? Bit by bit, the castle was dismantled and built into the walls of cottages, barns, and field boundaries. The castle dissolved into the landscape. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, something shifted. The ruin became an object of fascination. The Romantic movement saw beauty in the decay. They prized the picturesque artists, like Turner, traveled to these broken towers, painting them against dramatic, stormy skies. They saw the sublime in the crumbling arches. Ivy was allowed to grow unchecked. It wrapped its green fingers around the gray stone, softening the hard edges of war. It became a symbol of nature, reclaiming its dominion. Wealthy landowners even built follies, fake ruins, in their gardens, just to capture the mood of melancholic history. In France, architects like Viollet-le-Duc began to restore the great citadels, freezing them in a moment of idealized time. But for most, the ruin remained a ruin. With the arrival of the steam train, tourists began to flock to these sites. They came not to besiege, but to picnic, to stare at the empty windows and dream. The ruin serves as a memento mori, a reminder of death and the passage of time. When we stand in a roofless great hall, looking up at the passing clouds, we feel the weight of centuries. We hear the wind whistling through a glassless window arch. It is a lonely, hollow sound. The floor once covered in rushes and trodden by kings, is now a soft carpet of green grass. A bird nests in a niche that once held a torch. The golden light of sunset illuminates the broken silhouette, casting long, jagged shadows across the fields. It is a profound, heavy silence. The silence of a place that was once loud with life, now resigned to the quiet earth. It is ethereal, timeless, still fading. The history books close here, but the dream continues. The pages turn one final time, and we are left with the essence of the structure. We have dissected the economy, the architecture, and the seasons that shaped these monuments. But analysis fades, and what remains is the feeling of the stone cool, solid, and enduring. As the intellectual journey concludes, we allow our minds to drift away from the facts and figures, floating gently toward a place of pure imagination and rest. The ox cart has stopped its creaking. The mason has laid down his chisel. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers. The snow is falling softly outside, blanketing the world in white silence. There is nothing left to build. There is nothing left to defend. There is only the stone and the sleep that waits within its shadow. The great feast has ended. The music has faded into the heavy velvet of the past. The torches that once roared with bright orange life have been extinguished, one by one, until only the memory of their warmth remains in the stone. Now the castle sleeps. It is a deep, heavy slumber, earned after centuries of standing guard over the valley. We are the only ones left awake. You and I, we are drifting spirits, free to wander through these ancient halls without making a sound. We are here to witness the castle as it truly is, stripped of its pomp and its pageantry, existing only in the quiet whispers of the night. Let us begin our journey in the heart of the keep, where the heat still lingers, down in the great kitchens. We enter the kitchen, not through the bustling activity of the day, but through the heavy silence of the night. The air here is thick and still. It wraps around you like a warm blanket, carrying the complex, layered history of 1,000 meals. It is dark, but not pitch black. The massive hearth, wide enough to roast an ox, still holds the glowing memory of the day's fire. The embers are a deep, pulsing red, buried beneath the soft blanket of gray ash. Occasionally, a small spark pops and drifts upward, a tiny firefly of heat that vanishes into the vast, blackened chimney above. This faint, orange glow casts long, dancing shadows across the floor, painting the room in shades of amber and charcoal. Your eyes adjust to the dimness, and the shapes of the room begin to emerge. Dominating the space are the great iron cauldrons. They hang from heavy chains, suspended over the cooling embers. They are massive, round-bellied vessels of black metal, cold now to the touch, but looking solid and immovable. They have fed armies, they have fed kings, now they rest. The iron itself seems to breathe, contracting slightly as it cools, making tiny ticking sounds that echo in the quiet room. It is the sound of the metal settling in for the night, a metallic sigh of relief after the work is done. To your left, long wooden tables stretch out into the shadows. These tables are not delicate furniture. They are thick slabs of oak, scarred and smoothed by generations of knives and hands. If you were to run your hand along the surface, you would feel the grain of the wood raised slightly by years of scrubbing with sand and water. You would feel the cool, waxy residue of tallow and the phantom warmth of the loaves of bread that rested here only hours ago. On one table, a cluster of earthenware jugs sits in a silent huddle. They are heavy, rounded shapes, made of coarse clay and glazed in earth tones. They hold water, or perhaps the last dregs of ale, their corks sealed tight. They look like little sentinels guarding the empty table. The air is rich with scent. It is not the overpowering smell of cooking, but the subtle, lingering ghost of spices. You catch a drift of cinnamon, warm and sweet. Then a sharp note of ginger hangs in the stillness. Hanging from the high wooden rafters are bundles of dried herbs, their leaves crisp and curling in the dry heat rising from the hearth. Rosemary, thyme, and sage. They are suspended upside down, dark silhouettes against the ceiling, releasing their essential oils slowly into the night air. It is a clean, earthy smell, grounding and medicinal. It smells of the garden, brought indoors and preserved. In the corner, there is a stone sink, carved directly from the castle's foundation. It is a basin of gray granite, worn smooth as glass by centuries of water flowing over its lip. A single drop of water gathers at the copper tap. It hangs there, heavy and trembling, catching the red light of the embers like a ruby. Then it falls. Plink. The sound is startlingly loud in the silence. It ripples through the room, marking the passage of time. Then silence returns, deeper than before. Along the walls, copper pans hang from hooks. In the daylight, they are bright and blinding. Now, in the ember light, they are deep pools of bronze and gold, glinting softly in the gloom. They reflect the dying fire, holding on to the light as if they are afraid to let it go. Below them, sacks of flour are piled against the wall. They are made of rough Hessian cloth, scratchy and textured. They slump against each other, heavy and soft. You can almost smell the dust of the wheat, a dry, powdery scent that tickles the nose. We move past the pantry. The door is slightly ajar, and a draft of cool air escapes. It smells of cheese and apples, a sharp, crisp contrast to the warm, spicy air of the main kitchen. It is a cellar smell, damp and dark, but we do not go in. We stay in the warmth a moment longer. The silence here is not empty, it is full. It is a companionable silence. The room feels satisfied, like a person who has worked hard and is now enjoying a well-deserved rest. The shadows lengthen as the embers fade a little more. The orange glow dims to a dull rust color. It is time to leave the warmth behind. We turn away from the hearth, moving towards the heavy oak door that leads to the outside. We lift the iron latch, careful not to let it clang, and step out into the night. The transition is immediate. The heavy, warm air of the kitchen is replaced by the crisp, clean shock of the night. We have stepped into the pleasance, the castle's private garden. Here, the world is painted in silver and black. The moon is high above, a perfect coin of white light, bathing the enclosed garden in a spectral glow. The air here is cool, washing over your skin, waking the senses that were lulled by the kitchen's heat. This is a hortus conclusus, an enclosed garden, shut off from the wild world by high stone walls. It feels safe here, intimate. The wind cannot reach us, blocked by the massive fortifications that surround this little pocket of nature. We walk along a path of crushed white gravel. Beneath your feet, the stones crunch softly, a rhythmic, satisfying sound that seems to whisper to the sleeping plants. To your right and left are raised flower beds. They are boxed in with dark, weathered wood that is damp with the night dew. Inside these boxes, the earth is black and rich. The plants are sleeping. The medicinal herbs, the mint and the chamomile, have closed their leaves against the chill. You can smell them though. The scent of the garden at night is different from the day. It is the smell of damp soil, deep and musky. It is the smell of wet stone and green leaves. There is a sweetness here, too. White flowers, perhaps moonflowers or jasmine, have opened their petals to the moonlight, releasing a perfume that is heavy and intoxicating. They glow in the darkness, little stars that have fallen to the earth. In the center of the garden stands a stone fountain. It is old, covered in patches of velvet soft moss. The water does not shoot into the air, it trickles. It bubbles up from the center and spills over the edge of the bowl, running down the sides in a continuous, shimmering sheet. The sound is music. It is a gentle, melodic gurgle, a lullaby that never ends. The water catches the moonlight, turning into liquid silver as it falls into the pool below. You could sit on the stone bench nearby and listen to this sound for eternity. The bench is cold and hard, grounded and real. It is covered in lichen rough to the touch. We walk further under a trellis archway. Vines are twisted around the wood, thick and gnarled like old ropes. They have no leaves now, or perhaps just a few, but they form a tunnel of shadows. Passing through it feels like moving through a secret passage. On the other side, the high walls of the castle loom above us. They are stark and black against the indigo sky. You can see the silhouette of the battlements, the jagged teeth of the stone framing the stars. But down here, in the garden, those walls feel protective. They are the arms of the castle, holding the garden safe from the storms and the wars of the outside world. The air is so fresh here. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the oxygen produced by these sleeping plants. It tastes of rain and stone. It clears the mind. The heat of the kitchen is a distant memory now. You feel light, weightless, drifting through the silver light. The shadows of the leaves on the ground are sharp and precise, intricate lace patterns woven by the moon. A slight breeze stirs the air, rustling the ivy on the walls. It is a whisper, a hush sound. She, says the garden. Sleep, says the wind. We move towards a narrow door in the corner of the garden wall. It is a small, humble entrance, half hidden by a climbing rose bush. This door leads to the spiral stairs. We leave the silver garden behind, carrying the scent of damp earth and jasmine with us. As we step back into the darkness of the stone, we begin to climb. The stairs are narrow, winding upwards in a tight spiral. The stone steps are worn in the center, dipped low by the feet of scholars and astronomers who have climbed this tower for centuries. We go up and round and round. The air changes again. It becomes drier, dustier. The smell of earth fades, replaced by the smell of old things, paper, leather, wax. We have reached the tower room. This is a sanctuary of knowledge. It is a high room, circular in shape, perched at the very top of the keep. We push the heavy wooden door open and step inside. The silence here is different from the kitchen and the garden. It is a studious silence, a reverent stillness. The room is dimly lit by a single beeswax candle sitting on a heavy oak desk. The flame is small and steady, a teardrop of golden light in the gloom. It does not flicker, for the air here is perfectly still. The walls are lined with shelves, floor to ceiling. They are filled with the treasures of the mind. There are scrolls of vellum, rolled tight and stacked like logs. They are yellow with age, their edges crinkled and brown. You can imagine the sound they would make if you unrolled one, the dry crackle of the skin, the stiffness of the parchment. Beside them are great leather-bound books, They are thick volumes, their covers dark and worn. Some have brass clasps that gleam dully in the candlelight, locking their secrets away. The smell is intoxicating to anyone who loves stories. It is the scent of vanilla and almond, the chemical breakdown of old paper, mixed with the sharp tang of the leather bindings. Dust motes dance in the halo of the candle flame. They float lazily, suspended in the golden light, turning slowly in the air. They are like tiny stars in their own little galaxy. On the desk, beside the candle, sits an astrolabe. It is a complex instrument of brass rings and plates, designed to measure the heavens. It sits silent now, its job done for the night, reflecting the candle flame on its curved metal surface. A quill pen rests on a piece of unfinished parchment, the ink dried in the well. It looks as if the scholar just stepped away a moment ago, leaving his thoughts mid-sentence. The windows of the tower are tall and narrow. Heavy woolen curtains are drawn across them. Thick fabric dyed a deep crimson. They block out the night, keeping the room wrapped in a cocoon of warmth and shadow. You can feel the weight of the curtains, the coarseness of the wool. They muffle the sound of the wind outside, making the room feel separate from the world. You are high up here, above the rest of the castle, above the village, above the concerns of the earth. On the floor is a rug from the distant east. It is woven with intricate patterns of red and blue, faded now by time. The wool is scratchy underfoot, but it adds a layer of comfort to the cold stone floor. You feel watched over here, not by eyes, but by the wisdom contained in these books. The stars outside are mirrored by the knowledge inside. It is a peaceful place, a place to think, a place to dream. But we must not stay. The view calls to us. We must see what lies beyond the curtains. We move to the window. You reach out and grasp the heavy velvet of the curtain. It is thick and dusty. You pull it back, the heavy ring sliding silently on the rod. We open the window and step out onto the ramparts. The world opens up. The feeling of enclosure vanishes, replaced by a sudden, breathtaking vastness. We are standing on the high wall walk, the highest point of the castle. The wind greets us here, not as a whisper, but as a steady, flowing river of air. It is not cold, but cool. It rushes past your ears, ruffling your hair, stripping away the dust of the library. You place your hands on the rough stone of the crenellations. The stone is cool, but it still holds a faint memory of the sun's heat from the day, a subtle warmth that seeps into your palms. You look out. The world below is a tapestry of shadows and starlight. The landscape stretches out to the horizon, a rolling ocean of dark shapes. You can see the forest in the distance, a black mass of trees standing silent and still. They look like a sleeping army. Below, the river cuts through the valley like a ribbon of dropped silver. It reflects the moon, a bright, winding path that leads to the edge of the world. The water is moving. You know this, but from this height, it looks frozen in time, a painting of a river rather than the thing itself. Nearer to the castle walls, the village sleeps. There are no lights down there, no fires burn. The thatched roofs are just dark peaks against the lighter gray of the road. Everyone is asleep. The blacksmith, the baker, the farmer. They are all safe in their beds, unaware that you are watching over them. You feel a profound sense of peace. Up here, you are a guardian. The castle is a stone shell that protects the life within, and you are standing on its rim. The flag on the pole above you hangs limp. The wind has softened to a gentle breeze. It brushes your cheek like a ghost's touch. You look up. The sky is a dome of infinite depth. It is not black, but a deep, bruised purple, scattered with a million diamonds. The stars are so bright, so clear, they twinkle and burn in the cold air, ancient and unblinking. You feel small beneath them, but not insignificant. You are part of this vast, silent night. The silence is absolute. It is a high, ringing silence. There are no birds, no voices, no wheels turning, just the wind and the stars. You breathe in the night. It fills you with a sense of calm, a feeling of spaciousness. The worries of the day seem very small from up here. They are down there, in the dark, lost in the shadows. You are up here, in the light of the stars. But the wind is cooling. The night is deepening. It is time to find our rest. We turn away from the vastness of the world, leaving the stars to their watch. We step back through the tower room, down the spiral stairs, descending deeper into the safety of the keep. We move towards the Lord's chamber. We enter the final room. This is the heart of the castle's rest. The room is large, but it feels intimate, filled with soft textures and warm light. The center of the room is dominated by a massive four-poster bed. It is a fortress of sleep. The wood of the frame is dark oak, carved with vines and flowers that seem to grow out of the timber. Heavy velvet curtains surround the bed, tied back with gold tassels. The fabric is a deep, rich green, the color of a forest at dusk. It looks soft, inviting. You approach the bed. It is high off the ground. The mattress is thick, stuffed with the finest down feathers. It is not flat and hard, but billowed and soft, like a cloud captured and covered in linen. On top of the sheets lie heavy fur blankets. They are thick and plush, promising a warmth that will banish any chill. There is a fireplace in this room, too. The fire here has burned down low, just like in the kitchen. But these embers are closer, more intimate. They cast a soft, red glow across the room, lighting up the canopy overhead. The ceiling of the bed is painted blue, with gold stars, so that even when the curtains are drawn, you sleep under a heaven of your own making. You can see a brass bed warmer leaning against the hearth. It has done its job. The sheets will be warm. The air in the room is still and heavy. It smells of lavender, which has been sprinkled between the linens, and the faint, woodsy scent of the smoke. It is a soporific smell, a scent that tells the body it is time to shut down. You move towards the bed. You can imagine the sensation of climbing in. The mattress yields under your weight, sinking down, embracing you. It is so soft. The feathers settle around you, holding you up, supporting every tired muscle. You pull the fur blanket up. It is heavy. The weight of it is comforting. It presses down on you, grounding you, making you feel secure. The warmth of the preheated sheets seeps into your bones, relaxing the tension in your shoulders, your back, your legs. The room is silent. The castle is silent. The valley is silent. The only sound is the soft pop of the fire and the sound of your own breathing. You look at the heavy velvet curtains. They blur slightly in your vision. Your eyelids are heavy, so heavy it is a struggle to keep them open. The red glow of the fire is fading, becoming a soft, dark pink. The shadows in the corners of the room are stepping forward, gathering around the bed like silent guardians. The carved wood of the bed frame seems to soften. The painted stars on the canopy above seem to twinkle. You are sinking into the feathers, sinking into the warmth, sinking into the dark. The world is fading away. There is no more history, no more dates, no more battles. There is only this bed, this warmth, this moment. The fire has burned down to a soft glow, and the castle is silent around you. The stone walls that once repelled armies now serve only to guard your rest, keeping the world and its worries far away. You are safe here, in the heart of the keep, wrapped in warmth and shadow. Thank you for walking these ancient halls with me tonight. It has been a privilege to be your guide through history. If you are still awake, let your eyes close now. The drawbridge is up. The gate is barred. All is well. Sleep now. Good night.